Question 1. Examination of the data shows a potential discrepancy in a recent British Columbia driver's license application that requires investigation. What is the most appropriate approach to obtaining and utilizing the necessary information from the application? Option A. Use the information obtained from the driver's license application for the investigation and any other related administrative tasks that arise. Option B. Request the driver's license application information directly from a licensing office employee through informal communication. Option C. Obtain the entire driver's license application file to conduct a comprehensive review for any other potential issues. Option D. Access only the specific, necessary information from the driver's license application that is directly relevant to the stated purpose of the investigation, and do so through authorized channels. The correct answer is D. Access only the specific, necessary information from the driver's license application that is directly relevant to the stated purpose of the investigation, and do so through authorized channels. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect personal privacy and ensure data accuracy. A driver's license application in British Columbia contains sensitive personal information, and its handling must strictly adhere to the Provincial Personal Information Protection Act, PIPA, and the Motor Vehicle Act. Improper disclosure or use of this information can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of public trust in the licensing authority. Careful judgment is required to determine what information can be accessed and for what purpose, ensuring compliance with all relevant legislation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves accessing only the specific, necessary information from the British Columbia driver's license application that is directly relevant to the stated purpose of the investigation, and doing so through authorized channels. This approach aligns with the principles of data minimization and purpose limitation enshrined in British Columbia's Personal Information Protection Act, PIPA. Specifically, PIPA mandates that organizations collect, use, and disclose personal information only for purposes that a reasonable person would consider appropriate in the circumstances. Accessing information through official, secure, and authorized government portals or procedures ensures that the data is handled in a legally compliant and secure manner, respecting the applicant's privacy rights while fulfilling the investigative mandate. Incorrect approaches analysis. Accessing the entire driver's license application file without a specific, legally justifiable reason constitutes a violation of the principle of data minimization under PIPA. Broad access goes beyond what is necessary for the investigation and infringes upon the applicant's privacy. Furthermore, attempting to obtain the information through informal or unauthorized channels, such as requesting it directly from a licensing office employee without proper protocol, bypasses established security measures and legal safeguards, potentially leading to unauthorized disclosure and breaches of privacy, which are serious offenses under both PIPA and the Motor Vehicle Act. Finally, using the information obtained for purposes unrelated to the initial investigation, even if the information was initially accessed legitimately, is a clear violation of purpose limitation under PIPA and constitutes misuse of personal information. Professional reasoning. Professionals in British Columbia dealing with personal information, such as that found on driver's license applications, must adopt a framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This framework involves 1. Clearly defining the purpose for which information is needed and ensuring it is a legitimate and legally permissible purpose. 2. Identifying the minimum amount of information required to achieve that purpose. 3. Utilizing only authorized and secure methods for accessing and handling the information. 4. Documenting all access and usage of personal information. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating data handling practices to ensure ongoing compliance with British Columbia's PIPA and other relevant legislation, such as the Motor Vehicle Act. Question 2. Research into the British Columbia Graduated Licensing Program reveals that new drivers must adhere to specific conditions. A driver holding a Class 7 license is planning a late-night trip to pick up a friend who has just arrived at the airport. What is the most critical factor the driver must consider regarding their license restrictions? Option A. The need to pass a further advanced driving skills test before being allowed to drive after 10:00 p.m. Option B. The The requirement to have a qualified supervisor in the front passenger seat at all times while driving. Option C. The limitation on the number of passengers under 25 years of age that can be transported. Option D. The prohibition of driving between midnight and 5:00 a.m. unless accompanied by a qualified supervisor or for specific employment/educational reasons, and the restriction on carrying more than one passenger under 19 years of age, unless accompanied by a qualified supervisor. Correct answer is D. The prohibition of driving between midnight and 5:00 a.m. unless accompanied by a qualified supervisor or for specific employment/educational reasons, and the restriction on carrying more than one passenger under 19 years of age, unless accompanied by a qualified supervisor. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for new drivers in British Columbia, understanding the implications of a graduated licensing system and the specific restrictions that apply. The professional challenge lies in ensuring new drivers internalize these rules not just as arbitrary limitations, but as crucial safety measures designed to build experience gradually. Careful judgment is required to assess a driver's understanding of these nuances, as a superficial grasp can lead to dangerous situations. The correct approach involves a comprehensive understanding of the Graduated Licensing Program, GLP, as outlined by British Columbia's Motor Vehicle Act and its associated regulations. This program is designed to progressively introduce new drivers to the responsibilities of driving. Specifically, understanding the restrictions on new drivers, such as passenger limits and driving hours, is paramount. The correct approach emphasizes that a new driver must be aware of and adhere to all conditions of their license class, including the prohibition of driving between midnight and 5:00 a.m. unless accompanied by a qualified supervisor or for specific employment/educational reasons, and the restriction on carrying more than one passenger under 19 years of age, unless accompanied by a qualified supervisor. This aligns with the ethical responsibility to operate a vehicle safely and legally, and the regulatory requirement to comply with licensing conditions. An incorrect approach would be to assume that the primary goal of the GLP is simply to pass a test, without internalizing the underlying safety rationale. Instance, focusing solely on the practical driving skills, without understanding the specific restrictions associated with a Class 7 license, demonstrates a superficial understanding. This fails to address the regulatory framework that mandates adherence to these conditions for public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to believe that minor infractions of passenger or time restriction are acceptable as long as the driver is perceived as being competent or careful. This disregards the explicit legal prohibitions in place and the progressive nature of skill development intended by the GLP. It also ignores the ethical obligation to be a responsible road user. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the spirit and letter of the law. This involves not just testing knowledge of rules, but assessing comprehension of their purpose. When evaluating a new driver's readiness, professionals should consider their ability to articulate the reasons behind specific restrictions and demonstrate an understanding of how these restrictions contribute to overall road safety in British Columbia. Question 3. Which approach would be most appropriate for a British Columbia licensing official when an applicant presents a driver's license that appears to be expired, and the applicant claims it is a valid form of identification for a new license application? Option A. Ask the applicant to obtain a new, valid driver's license from another jurisdiction before returning to complete the application. Option B. Accept the expired driver's license as a temporary measure while initiating a process to verify its validity with the issuing authority. Option C. Request the applicant to provide a current, valid driver's license or other acceptable government-issued identification as per the Motor Vehicle Act regulations for proof of identity. Option D. Proceed with processing the application based on the applicant's verbal assurance that the expired license is still valid for identification purposes. The correct answer is C. Request the applicant to provide a current, valid driver's license or other acceptable government-issued identification as per the Motor Vehicle Act regulations for proof of identity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect personal information. A driver's license applicant's personal details are sensitive. An unauthorized disclosure or use could lead to identity theft or other harms. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with British Columbia's privacy legislation, while still facilitating legitimate administrative processes. The best approach involves verifying the applicant's identity through official channels and adhering strictly to the established procedures for handling personal information as outlined in British Columbia's Personal Information Protection Act, PIPA. This means requesting the applicant to provide the necessary documentation directly to the licensing authority or authorized personnel, who are trained to handle such information securely and in accordance with privacy laws. This ensures that the information is collected, used, and disclosed only for the specific purpose for which it was provided, and that it is protected from unauthorized access. An approach that involves accepting a photocopy of a driver's license from a third party without independent verification of its authenticity or the applicant's identity poses significant regulatory and ethical risks. This could lead to the acceptance of fraudulent documents, thereby compromising the integrity of the licensing system. Furthermore, handling photocopies without proper authorization or secure storage could violate PIPA provisions regarding the protection of personal information, potentially exposing the licensing authority to penalties and reputational damage. Another unacceptable approach would be to dismiss the need for identification altogether, assuming the applicant is who they claim to be. This directly contravenes the fundamental principles of identity verification mandated by the Motor Vehicle Act and its regulations in British Columbia, which are designed to ensure that only qualified and properly identified individuals are issued driver's licenses. Such a failure would undermine public safety and the credibility of the licensing process. Finally, an approach that involves sharing the applicant's personal information with unauthorized individuals or for purposes unrelated to the licensing application would be a clear breach of privacy laws. This demonstrates a disregard for the applicant's right to privacy and could result in severe legal consequences. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the Motor Vehicle Act and PIPA, recognizing the sensitivity of personal information, and always seeking to verify identity through authorized and secure methods. When in doubt, consulting with supervisors or legal counsel regarding proper procedures for handling sensitive information is a crucial step in ensuring responsible decision-making. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that a driving instructor in British Columbia is conducting a road test for a nervous student. The student is exhibiting significant anxiety, evidenced by trembling hands and a tendency to overcorrect steering. Despite these signs, the student has managed to stay within their lane for the initial part of the test. However, at a moderate traffic intersection, the student hesitates for an extended period before proceeding, nearly causing a minor disruption to traffic flow, and later drifts significantly towards the center line while navigating a gentle curve. Considering the regulatory framework of British Columbia and the ethical obligations of a driving instructor, which approach best balances the student's assessment with public safety? Option A. Advise the student that their nervousness is unacceptable and that they will automatically fail the test, then proceed with a perfunctory assessment. Option B. Immediately terminate the road test and advise the student to cease all driving practice until they can demonstrate complete composure. Option C. Proceed with the full assessment, overlooking minor errors and hesitations due to the student's visible nervousness, focusing primarily on their ability to follow basic directions. Option D. Continue the assessment, providing calm, clear instructions and observing for consistent patterns of unsafe behavior, while being prepared to terminate the test if a significant risk to public safety emerges. The correct answer is D. Continue the assessment, providing calm, clear instructions and observing for consistent patterns of unsafe behavior, while being prepared to terminate the test if a significant risk to public safety emerges. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a driving instructor in British Columbia because it requires balancing the immediate need to assess a student's driving skills with the paramount responsibility of ensuring public safety. The student's nervousness is a common factor, but the instructor must discern whether the nervousness is manageable or indicative of a fundamental lack of control that poses a risk. Careful judgment is required to avoid being overly lenient due to sympathy or overly strict due to an abundance of caution, both of which could have negative consequences for the student's learning and public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a structured, phased approach to the assessment. This begins with a clear explanation of the route and the assessment criteria, allowing the student to anticipate expectations. During the drive, the instructor should provide calm, constructive feedback, focusing on observable behaviors and adherence to the Motor Vehicle Act of British Columbia. If the student demonstrates a consistent inability to maintain lane position, control speed appropriately, or respond to traffic signals, despite clear instructions and a controlled environment, the instructor must recognize that the student is not yet ready for independent driving. The assessment should be terminated if the student's actions create a significant risk, and the student should be advised on specific areas for improvement and the necessity of further practice before reassessment. This aligns with the ethical duty of care to the public and the student, as well as the regulatory requirements for driver licensing in British Columbia, which mandate a certain level of competency to ensure road safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the full assessment despite clear and repeated instances of the student driving erratically, such as consistently crossing lane markings or failing to yield appropriately, simply because the student is visibly distressed. This approach fails to uphold the instructor's duty to public safety and contravenes the spirit of the Motor Vehicle Act, which aims to license only competent drivers. It prioritizes the student's immediate emotional state over the objective assessment of their ability to operate a vehicle safely. Another incorrect approach is to immediately terminate the assessment and advise the student to stop practicing altogether upon the first minor error or sign of nervousness. While safety is crucial, this approach lacks the nuance required for effective instruction and assessment. It fails to differentiate between manageable nervousness and genuine incompetence, potentially discouraging a student who might benefit from further, targeted practice under supervision. It does not provide the student with specific feedback on their performance, hindering their learning process. A third incorrect approach is to overlook significant driving errors, such as failing to check blind spots during lane changes or misjudging distances at intersections, because the student claims to be trying their best or expresses a strong desire to pass. This approach compromises the integrity of the licensing process and directly violates the regulatory framework designed to ensure that only safe drivers are licensed. It prioritizes the student's subjective desire over objective safety standards. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety while also being supportive of the learning process. This involves 1. Establishing clear expectations and criteria at the outset. 2. Observing and documenting performance objectively, referencing specific rules from the Motor Vehicle Act of British Columbia. 3. Providing timely, constructive feedback. 4. Making a judgment call based on observable behaviors and the level of risk posed, rather than solely on the student's emotional state or expressed desires. And 5. Communicating the decision and the rationale clearly and empathetically to the student, outlining next steps for improvement. Question 5. The performance metrics show a significant increase in driver errors on British Columbia highways during periods of adverse weather. Which of the following impact assessment approaches would be most effective in addressing this issue? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to evaluate existing signage, variable message signs, speed limit advisories, and driver education materials related to adverse weather conditions, and propose targeted improvements based on the findings. Option B. Implement a blanket reduction in speed limits on all highways experiencing adverse weather conditions, regardless of specific road characteristics or visibility levels. Option C. Immediately increase the presence of traffic enforcement officers on affected highways to deter risky driving behavior during adverse weather. Option D. Rely on informal feedback from a small group of experienced drivers and highway maintenance crews to identify the primary causes of the increased errors. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to evaluate existing signage, variable message signs, speed limit advisories, and driver education materials related to adverse weather conditions, and propose targeted improvements based on the findings. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in driver error rates during adverse weather conditions on British Columbia highways. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a proactive and responsible approach to public safety, balancing the need for efficient traffic flow with the paramount importance of preventing accidents. The challenge lies in identifying the root causes of the increased errors and implementing effective mitigation strategies without unduly restricting mobility or creating new hazards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any interventions are evidence-based, proportionate, and aligned with the goals of the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act and its associated regulations. The best approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that systematically analyzes the contributing factors to the observed driver errors. This includes evaluating the adequacy of existing signage and variable message signs, VMS, for weather-related warnings, assessing the effectiveness of current speed limit advisories during precipitation or reduced visibility, and considering the need for enhanced driver education campaigns specific to adverse weather driving in British Columbia. This approach is correct because it is data-driven, addresses multiple potential causes, and seeks to implement targeted, evidence-based solutions. It directly aligns with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure's mandate to ensure safe and efficient transportation systems, as outlined in the Motor Vehicle Act, which emphasizes the responsibility of the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles to promote road safety. An approach that focuses solely on increasing enforcement presence without first understanding the underlying reasons for the errors is professionally unacceptable. It fails to address potential systemic issues such as inadequate warning systems or unclear advisories, and may lead to driver frustration and a perception of arbitrary enforcement, rather than fostering a culture of safety. It also neglects the proactive elements of road safety management. Another unacceptable approach would be to immediately reduce speed limits across all affected highways without a detailed analysis of specific road segments and weather conditions. This is an overly broad and potentially inefficient measure that could impede traffic flow unnecessarily and may not be justified on all sections of the highway, failing to meet the principle of proportionality in regulatory action. Finally, an approach that relies on anecdotal evidence from a few drivers or operators, without a systematic data collection and analysis process, is professionally unsound. This lacks the rigor required for effective public policy and could lead to misinformed decisions that do not effectively address the problem or may even create new ones. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data collection and analysis, followed by the development and evaluation of targeted interventions. This involves understanding the problem thoroughly, considering a range of potential solutions, assessing their feasibility and impact, and implementing the most effective and proportionate measures, all while remaining accountable to the regulatory framework and the public interest. Question 6. The performance metrics show a significant increase in collisions at the intersection of Main Street and Elm Avenue in Vancouver, British Columbia, over the past 6 months. What is the most appropriate initial step to address this escalating safety concern? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive traffic engineering study to analyze contributing factors such as traffic volume, speed, visibility, road geometry, and driver behavior patterns at the intersection. Option B. Immediately increase police presence and traffic enforcement at the intersection to deter speeding and other violations. Option C. Wait for the collision rate to stabilize or decrease naturally before allocating resources to investigate the issue further. Option D. Propose the installation of a new traffic light system, assuming the current signal timing is the primary cause of the accidents. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive traffic engineering study to analyze contributing factors such as traffic volume, speed, visibility, road geometry, and driver behavior patterns at the intersection. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the number of collisions at a specific intersection in British Columbia. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a proactive and data-driven approach to public safety, balancing resource allocation with the potential for preventing future harm. The driver's licensing and road safety framework in British Columbia, as governed by the Motor Vehicle Act and associated regulations, mandates that authorities take reasonable steps to ensure road safety. A failure to act on clear indicators of risk could have serious consequences, both in terms of public safety and potential liability. The best approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that goes beyond simply observing collision data. This includes analyzing the contributing factors to the collisions, such as traffic volume, speed, visibility, road design, and driver behavior. Based on this analysis, a range of potential interventions can be identified and evaluated for their effectiveness and feasibility. This data-driven, multifaceted assessment aligns with the principles of public safety management and the proactive responsibilities outlined in British Columbia's road safety legislation, aiming to address the root causes of the problem rather than just the symptoms. An approach that focuses solely on increasing enforcement without understanding the underlying causes is professionally unacceptable. While enforcement can deter certain behaviors, it may not address systemic issues like poor road design or inadequate signage. This could lead to a temporary reduction in collisions, but the problem might re-emerge or shift to other areas. Furthermore, a reactive approach that waits for a significant increase in collisions before taking action fails to meet the standard of due diligence expected in public safety management. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to implement a costly infrastructure change without a thorough analysis of its potential impact or necessity. This could lead to a misallocation of public funds and may not effectively solve the collision problem. The decision-making process for such situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the problem, the identification of potential solutions, a rigorous assessment of the effectiveness and cost-benefit of each solution, and ongoing monitoring of the implemented measures. This ensures that interventions are evidence-based, proportionate, and contribute to the overall goal of improving road safety in British Columbia. Question 7. The performance metrics show a significant increase in driver errors and near-miss incidents on British Columbia highways during periods of heavy rain and fog. Considering the mandate of the Provincial Licensing Authority to ensure driver competency and public safety, which of the following actions represents the most effective and responsible response to this trend? Option A. Conduct a thorough review and potential update of the driver education curriculum and practical testing standards to better address adverse weather driving conditions. Option B. Increase the number of traffic enforcement officers patrolling highways during adverse weather events to issue more tickets for unsafe driving. Option C. Launch a broad public service announcement campaign across various media platforms highlighting the dangers of driving in poor weather. Option D. Attribute the increase in errors to isolated incidents and individual driver inattention, without initiating systemic changes to licensing procedures. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review and potential update of the driver education curriculum and practical testing standards to better address adverse weather driving conditions. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in driver error rates during adverse weather conditions on British Columbia highways. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a proactive and responsible approach to public safety, balancing the need for efficient traffic flow with the paramount importance of preventing accidents. The Driver's Licensing Authority in British Columbia has a mandate to ensure drivers possess the necessary skills and judgment to operate vehicles safely under a variety of conditions, including those that are more hazardous. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate level of intervention and education to address the identified trend. The best approach involves a comprehensive review of the current driver education curriculum and testing protocols specifically for adverse weather conditions. This includes analyzing whether existing modules adequately cover topics such as reduced visibility, hydroplaning, braking distances, and the use of vehicle lights. It also necessitates an assessment of whether the practical driving tests adequately simulate or evaluate a driver's ability to handle these conditions safely. If deficiencies are identified, the authority should initiate a process to update the curriculum and testing standards, potentially incorporating more rigorous scenarios or requiring specific demonstrated competencies before a license is issued or renewed. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the root cause of the performance metric trend by enhancing the preparedness of drivers. It aligns with the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act, which mandates the Superintendent of Motor Vehicles to establish and maintain standards for driver training and licensing to promote road safety. Ethically, it fulfills the authority's duty of care to the public by taking concrete steps to mitigate risks associated with driving in adverse weather. An incorrect approach would be to simply increase the frequency of roadside enforcement during adverse weather. While enforcement plays a role, it is a reactive measure that addresses violations after they occur. It does not proactively equip drivers with the knowledge and skills to prevent errors in the first place, failing to address the underlying issue identified by the performance metrics. This approach is ethically questionable as it prioritizes punishment over prevention and may not significantly reduce the accident rate if drivers lack fundamental competency. Another incorrect approach would be to solely rely on public awareness campaigns about driving in adverse weather. While these campaigns can be beneficial, they are often insufficient on their own to change ingrained driving habits or impart the necessary practical skills. They lack the direct impact of curriculum and testing reforms that ensure drivers are demonstrably competent. This approach fails to meet the regulatory requirement of ensuring drivers possess adequate skills, as it does not mandate or verify the acquisition of such skills. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to dismiss the performance metrics as statistical anomalies without further investigation. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold the responsibility to ensure public safety. Ignoring data that indicates a potential systemic issue with driver preparedness in adverse weather conditions is a dereliction of duty and ethically unacceptable, as it puts the public at unnecessary risk. Professionals should employ a data-driven decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying the problem through performance metrics. 2. Analyzing the root causes of the problem, considering factors like training, testing, and driver behavior. 3. Developing and evaluating potential solutions, prioritizing those that are proactive and address the identified root causes. 4. Implementing the chosen solution with clear objectives and evaluation mechanisms. 5. Continuously monitoring performance to ensure the solution is effective and making adjustments as needed. Question 8. Quality control measures reveal that a driving examiner in British Columbia has been consistently approving applicants for their Class 5 license, based primarily on their completion of the minimum required supervised driving hours and the successful completion of the knowledge test, without conducting a sufficiently rigorous practical road test that thoroughly assesses hazard perception and defensive driving techniques. What is the most appropriate professional response to this situation? Option A. Implement a comprehensive review of the examiner's practical road test evaluations to ensure they are consistently assessing hazard perception, defensive driving, and adherence to all British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act regulations, and provide targeted retraining if deficiencies are identified. Option B. Recommend that the examiner rely more heavily on the applicant's self-assessment of their driving abilities and their confidence in handling various road conditions. Option C. Suggest that the examiner prioritize applicants who express a strong desire to obtain their license quickly, as this indicates a high level of motivation and readiness. Option D. Advise the examiner to continue with their current practice, as long as the applicant has met the minimum time requirements and passed the knowledge test, to ensure efficient processing of licenses. The correct answer is A. Implement a comprehensive review of the examiner's practical road test evaluations to ensure they are consistently assessing hazard perception, defensive driving, and adherence to all British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act regulations, and provide targeted retraining if deficiencies are identified. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the paramount importance of ensuring public safety on British Columbia roads. A new driver may be eager to obtain their license, but the graduated licensing program in British Columbia is specifically designed to mitigate risks associated with inexperience. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the applicant's readiness and understanding of the program's intent, rather than simply verifying completion of required steps. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough assessment of the applicant's practical driving skills and understanding of safe driving practices, as mandated by the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act and its associated regulations. This includes evaluating their ability to anticipate hazards, make sound judgments in various traffic situations, and demonstrate adherence to all traffic laws and safe driving techniques. The examiner must confirm that the applicant has not only met the minimum time requirements for each stage of the graduated licensing, but has also developed the necessary competence and maturity to operate a vehicle safely. This aligns with the ethical obligation to protect the public and uphold the integrity of the licensing system. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the applicant's self-reported completion of the required supervised driving hours and the passage of any prerequisite knowledge tests. This fails to adequately assess practical competency and could lead to the issuance of a license to an individual who is not yet a safe driver, thereby compromising public safety and violating the spirit of the graduated licensing program. Another incorrect approach would be to grant the license based on the applicant's perceived enthusiasm or their assertion that they feel ready. Subjective feelings are not a substitute for demonstrated skill and adherence to establish safety standards. This approach disregards the objective criteria set forth in the Motor Vehicle Act and the practical testing protocols designed to ensure driver competence. A further incorrect approach would be to expedite the licensing process due to external pressure, such as a family member's insistence or the applicant's upcoming travel plans. Such external factors must not influence the objective assessment of the applicant's driving ability. Prioritizing expediency over safety would be a serious ethical and regulatory breach, undermining the purpose of the licensing system. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes public safety above all else. This involves a commitment to objective assessment based on established criteria, adherence to regulatory requirements, and the ethical responsibility to ensure that only competent individuals are granted driving privileges. When faced with situations where an applicant may not fully meet the required standards, professionals must have the courage to delay or deny licensing until the necessary competencies are demonstrated, thereby upholding the integrity of the licensing process and protecting the community. Question 9. The performance metrics show a significant increase in collisions at the intersection of Main Street and Elm Avenue in Vancouver, British Columbia, over the past 6 months. What is the most appropriate initial response to address this escalating safety concern? Option A. Conduct a detailed traffic engineering study to identify contributing factors and develop data-driven mitigation strategies. Option B. Propose the immediate installation of a new traffic light system at the intersection, regardless of other contributing factors. Option C. Immediately increase police presence and traffic enforcement at the intersection to deter unsafe driving. Option D. Classify the recent collisions as isolated incidents and monitor the situation without immediate intervention. Correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed traffic engineering study to identify contributing factors and develop data-driven mitigation strategies. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in the number of collisions at a specific intersection in British Columbia. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a proactive and data-driven approach to public safety, balancing resource allocation with the potential for preventing future harm. The Driver's Licensing and Road Safety Framework in British Columbia, governed by the Motor Vehicle Act and associated regulations, mandates that authorities take reasonable steps to ensure road safety. A failure to act on clear indicators of risk could have severe consequences, both legally and ethically. The best approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that prioritizes data analysis and evidence-based solutions. This means thoroughly investigating the collision data, identifying contributing factors such as traffic volume, road design, driver behavior, and environmental conditions, and then developing targeted interventions. These interventions could range from traffic calming measures and improved signage to public awareness campaigns or even infrastructure modifications. The justification for this approach lies in its adherence to the principles of due diligence and public safety enshrined in British Columbia's road safety legislation. It demonstrates a commitment to understanding the root causes of the problem and implementing effective, sustainable solutions. An approach that focuses solely on increasing enforcement without understanding the underlying causes is professionally unacceptable. While enforcement is a component of road safety, it becomes a reactive measure if not informed by a deeper analysis of why collisions are occurring. This could lead to inefficient use of resources and may not address the fundamental issues contributing to the problem, potentially failing to prevent future incidents. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the data as statistical anomalies without further investigation. British Columbia's regulatory framework implies a duty of care to address identified safety concerns. Ignoring clear trends in collision data, especially if they indicate a pattern of risk, could be seen as a dereliction of this duty and may have legal ramifications if an accident occurs due to this inaction. Finally, an approach that proposes immediate costly infrastructure changes without a thorough impact assessment is also professionally unsound. While infrastructure improvements can be effective, they require careful planning, cost-benefit analysis, and consideration of potential unintended consequences. Implementing changes without a clear understanding of their impact could be wasteful and may not effectively solve the problem. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with data collection and analysis, followed by the identification of contributing factors, the development of a range of potential solutions, an assessment of the impact and feasibility of each solution, and finally, the implementation and ongoing monitoring of the chosen intervention. This iterative process ensures that decisions are informed, effective, and aligned with the objective of enhancing public safety on British Columbia's roads. Question 10. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the number of reported collisions involving young drivers under 25 in British Columbia over the past fiscal year. If the collision data reveals that 60% of these increased collisions occurred between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., and 75% of those nighttime collisions involved single-vehicle run-off road incidents, what is the most appropriate initial calculation to inform potential interventions, assuming a baseline of 1,000 collisions involving young drivers in the previous year? Option A. Calculate the number of new driver's licenses issued to individuals under 25 in the current year. Option B. Calculate the total number of driving hours logged by young drivers in British Columbia during nighttime hours for the current year. Option C. Calculate the average speed of vehicles involved in all reported collisions involving young drivers in the current year. Option D. Calculate the absolute number of nighttime single-vehicle run-off-road collisions involving young drivers in the current year, and determine the percentage increase from the previous year's estimated baseline for this specific incident type. Correct answer is D. Calculate the absolute number of nighttime single-vehicle run-off-road collisions involving young drivers in the current year, and determine the percentage increase from the previous year's estimated baseline for this specific incident type. Explanation. The performance metrics show a significant increase in the number of reported collisions involving young drivers under 25 in British Columbia over the past fiscal year. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a data-driven approach to identify potential contributing factors and propose effective interventions, balancing public safety with the practicalities of driver education and licensing. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed solutions are both effective and compliant with British Columbia's Motor Vehicle Act and related regulations. The best approach involves a comprehensive statistical analysis of collision data, segmenting by age, road conditions, time of day, and vehicle type, and then correlating these findings with the graduated licensing program's effectiveness and any recent changes in traffic enforcement strategies. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the observed performance metric by seeking to understand the underlying causes through objective data. It aligns with the principles of evidence-based policymaking, which is implicitly encouraged by the need for effective road safety measures under the Motor Vehicle Act. By identifying specific patterns, such as a higher incidence of nighttime collisions or specific types of maneuvers leading to accidents, targeted interventions can be developed, such as enhanced driver education modules focusing on high-risk scenarios or adjusted licensing restrictions for new drivers. An incorrect approach would be to immediately propose a blanket increase in insurance premiums for all young drivers without a detailed analysis. This fails to identify the specific causes of the increased collisions and unfairly penalizes all young drivers, regardless of their individual driving records or the specific circumstances contributing to the accidents. It lacks the data-driven justification required for effective policy and could be seen as an arbitrary financial burden, potentially leading to public dissatisfaction and challenges under consumer protection principles. Another incorrect approach would be to solely focus on increasing the number of roadside sobriety checks. While impaired driving is a serious concern, this approach assumes that alcohol or drug impairment is the primary or sole cause of the increased collisions among young drivers. Without a thorough analysis of the collision data, this intervention might not address other significant contributing factors, such as inexperience with specific road conditions, speed-related incidents, or distractions. It represents a reactive measure that may not be the most impactful solution. A further incorrect approach would be to advocate for a complete suspension of driving privileges for all drivers under 25 until the issue is resolved. This is an overly punitive and impractical solution that would have significant negative societal and economic impacts. It fails to acknowledge that many young drivers are safe and responsible, and does not offer a constructive path forward for improving safety. It also ignores the graduated nature of the licensing system in British Columbia, which is designed to progressively build driving experience, Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem: increased collisions among young drivers. This should be followed by data collection and rigorous analysis to identify root causes. Based on the analysis, potential solutions should be brainstormed, considering their feasibility, cost-effectiveness, and regulatory compliance. Finally, the chosen solutions should be implemented, monitored, and evaluated for their effectiveness, with adjustments made as necessary. This iterative, data-driven process ensures that interventions are targeted, justifiable, and ultimately contribute to improved road safety in British Columbia. Question 11. The performance metrics show a consistent increase in minor infractions reported by new drivers in British Columbia over the past quarter. Considering the goal of improving road safety and driver competence, which of the following approaches best addresses this trend? Option A. Mandate an additional 20 hours of supervised driving practice for all new drivers, regardless of their current skill level or the specific nature of the infractions. Option B. Analyze the raw data of reported infractions to identify the most common types, and then update the driver's handbook with more detailed explanations of those specific rules. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the new driver training curriculum and practical driving assessment methods, incorporating feedback from new drivers on their experiences and challenges on British Columbia roads. Option D. Immediately implement a zero-tolerance policy, with increased fines for all minor infractions committed by drivers with less than 1 year of experience. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the new driver training curriculum and practical driving assessment methods, incorporating feedback from new drivers on their experiences and challenges on British Columbia roads. Explanation: the performance metrics show a consistent increase in minor infractions reported by new drivers in British Columbia over the past quarter. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of driver education effectiveness and the potential impact of external factors, rather than a simple statistical interpretation. Careful judgment is required to avoid misattributing the cause of the increase and implementing ineffective remedial measures. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive review of the new driver training curriculum and the practical application of learned skills in real-world driving conditions within British Columbia. This includes analyzing the content of the training, the methods of instruction, and the assessment strategies used. Furthermore, it necessitates gathering feedback from newly licensed drivers regarding their confidence levels and perceived challenges on BC roads, and correlating this with the types of infractions being reported. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the core purpose of driver education: to equip individuals with the skills and knowledge to drive safely and legally within the specific context of British Columbia's road network, traffic laws, and common driving conditions. It aligns with the ethical responsibility of driver education providers to ensure their programs are effective and contribute to public safety, as implicitly mandated by the Motor Vehicle Act of British Columbia and its associated regulations concerning driver licensing and training. An approach that focuses solely on increasing the number of mandatory practice hours without evaluating the quality or relevance of that practice is professionally unacceptable. This fails to address the root cause if the issue lies in curriculum deficiencies or inadequate skill development, and could lead to drivers simply repeating ineffective habits. It also overlooks the specific challenges of driving in British Columbia, such as varied weather conditions or complex urban intersections, which may not be adequately covered. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to implement stricter penalties for all new drivers based on the increased infraction rate. This punitive measure fails to acknowledge that the issue may stem from insufficient training or understanding, rather than deliberate disregard for the law. It also risks alienating new drivers and creating a negative perception of the licensing process, without addressing the underlying educational gap. This approach is ethically questionable, as it punishes individuals for potential shortcomings in the training system they have undergone. Finally, an approach that involves a superficial review of the reported infractions, without investigating the underlying causes or the effectiveness of the current training program, is also professionally deficient. This reactive stance does not contribute to long-term safety improvements and fails to uphold the duty of care to ensure new drivers are adequately prepared for the responsibilities of operating a vehicle on British Columbia's roads. Professionals should employ a data-driven yet context-aware decision-making framework. This involves 1. clearly defining the problem and its potential contributing factors. 2. Gathering relevant data, including performance metrics, feedback, and contextual information specific to the jurisdiction, British Columbia. 3. Analyzing this data to identify root causes. 4. Developing and implementing targeted interventions based on the analysis. 5. Continuously monitoring the effectiveness of interventions and making adjustments as needed. This iterative process ensures that interventions are relevant, effective, and ethically sound, prioritizing the safety and competence of new drivers. Question 12. The efficiency study reveals a need to reevaluate traffic calming measures on a busy residential street in Surrey, British Columbia. Which of the following approaches best addresses the potential impacts on residents and road safety? Option A. Implement the least expensive traffic calming solutions to maximize cost savings. Option B. Rely on the opinions of a few vocal residents to determine if traffic calming is truly necessary. Option C. Immediately install the most aggressive traffic calming devices available to quickly reduce vehicle speeds. Option D. Conduct a thorough impact assessment including traffic data analysis, community consultation, and evaluation of various traffic calming options before implementation. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough impact assessment including traffic data analysis, community consultation, and evaluation of various traffic calming options before implementation. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a need to reevaluate the current traffic calming measures on a busy residential street in Surrey, British Columbia. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for improved road safety and reduced traffic speeds with the potential impact on local residents' access, convenience, and the overall character of the neighborhood. A careful judgment is required to select an approach that is both effective and minimally disruptive, adhering to the principles of responsible urban planning and community engagement, as outlined by the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act and local municipal bylaws. The best approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that includes detailed traffic data collection, consultation with affected residents and businesses, and consideration of alternative solutions. This method is correct because it aligns with the principles of evidence-based decision-making and democratic process. Specifically, the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act, while empowering municipalities to implement traffic control measures, implicitly requires that such measures be reasonable and serve a demonstrable public safety purpose. Engaging the community ensures that the chosen solution is practical, addresses legitimate concerns, and fosters public acceptance, thereby enhancing its long-term effectiveness. This approach prioritizes a thorough understanding of the problem and its potential consequences before implementing a solution. An approach that focuses solely on installing the most aggressive traffic calming devices without prior community consultation is professionally unacceptable. This fails to consider the potential negative impacts on emergency vehicle response times, waste collection, or the accessibility for residents with mobility issues, which could lead to unintended consequences and public opposition. Ethically, it disregards the principle of community engagement and the right of residents to be informed and have their concerns heard. Another unacceptable approach is to dismiss the need for traffic calming altogether based on anecdotal evidence from a few vocal residents. This ignores the objective data that likely prompted the efficiency study and fails to uphold the professional responsibility to ensure public safety on the roadways. It also risks creating a perception of bias or inaction, undermining public trust. Finally, an approach that prioritizes cost saving above all else, leading to the selection of the cheapest but least effective traffic calming measures, is also professionally flawed. While fiscal responsibility is important, it should not compromise the primary objective of improving road safety. This approach fails to meet the professional standard of providing effective solutions that genuinely address the identified problem. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear problem definition supported by data, followed by the exploration of a range of potential solutions. Each solution should be evaluated against criteria that include effectiveness, cost, community impact, and regulatory compliance. Crucially, a robust stakeholder engagement process should be integrated throughout the evaluation and selection phases to ensure that the final decision is informed, equitable, and sustainable. Question 13. The performance metrics show a significant increase in driver error rates on British Columbia highways during periods of adverse weather. Considering the mandate to ensure road safety and driver competency under the Motor Vehicle Act of British Columbia, which of the following strategies represents the most effective and ethically sound approach to address this trend? Option A. Increase the frequency and severity of roadside inspections specifically for tire tread depth during any period of inclement weather. Option B. Suspend the driver's license of any individual involved in an accident on a British Columbia highway during adverse weather conditions, irrespective of fault. Option C. Immediately implement mandatory, across-the-board speed limit reductions on all provincial highways whenever adverse weather is forecast. Option D. Enhance the existing driver training curriculum and launch targeted public awareness campaigns focusing on safe driving techniques for rain, fog, snow, and ice. The correct answer is D. Enhance the existing driver training curriculum and launch targeted public awareness campaigns focusing on safe driving techniques for rain, fog, snow, and ice. Explanation: the performance metrics show a concerning trend in driver error rates during adverse weather conditions on British Columbia highways. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need to address safety concerns with the practicalities of driver training and the potential for overregulation. Careful judgment is required to implement effective interventions without unduly burdening drivers or creating an environment of excessive fear or anxiety. The best professional approach involves a targeted, evidence-based strategy that focuses on enhancing driver education and awareness, specifically for adverse weather conditions. This includes reviewing and potentially updating the existing British Columbia driver training curriculum to incorporate more comprehensive modules on driving in rain, fog, snow, and ice. It also entails developing and disseminating targeted public awareness campaigns through official channels like IKE and the BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, highlighting common hazards and best practices. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the identified performance gap by improving driver knowledge and skills, which is a fundamental aspect of road safety as mandated by the Motor Vehicle Act of British Columbia. It aligns with the ethical responsibility of the licensing authority to ensure drivers are adequately prepared for the conditions they are likely to encounter. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement stricter, blanket speed limit reductions on all highways during any period of inclement weather. This is problematic because it fails to differentiate between varying degrees of adverse conditions and the specific risks associated with different road types and traffic volumes. While speed is a factor, a blanket reduction may not be the most effective or efficient solution and could lead to driver frustration or complacency if not properly justified and communicated. It also bypasses the opportunity to educate drivers on how to adjust their speed appropriately based on conditions, which is a more sustainable safety measure. Another incorrect approach would be to significantly increase the frequency and severity of roadside inspections solely focused on tire tread depth during adverse weather. While tire condition is important, this approach is too narrow and reactive. It focuses on a single mechanical aspect without addressing the broader range of driver behaviors and decision-making that contribute to accidents in poor weather. Furthermore, it places a disproportionate burden on drivers for a specific mechanical issue without a direct link to the observed performance metric of increased error rates due to weather conditions. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to suspend drivers' licenses for any driver involved in an accident during adverse weather, regardless of fault or contributing factors. This is an overly punitive and indiscriminate measure that does not align with the principles of fair and proportionate enforcement. It fails to acknowledge that accidents can occur for a multitude of reasons, and that the goal of driver licensing and regulation is to promote safe driving practices through education and appropriate enforcement, not solely through punitive measures. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with data analysis to identify specific problem areas. This should be followed by a review of existing regulations and training programs to determine gaps. Interventions should then be designed to be targeted, evidence-based, and proportionate, with a clear focus on improving driver competency and awareness. Continuous evaluation of the effectiveness of implemented strategies is also crucial. Question 14. Stakeholder feedback indicates significant divergence of opinion regarding proposed amendments to speed limit regulations on rural highways in British Columbia. Considering the need for a robust and fair decision-making process, which of the following approaches best addresses the diverse concerns and regulatory objectives? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment that analyzes the potential effects of proposed changes on all identified road user groups, traffic flow, and accident statistics, while also considering the feasibility of enforcement and the overall public safety goals outlined in the Motor Vehicle Act of British Columbia. Option B. Focus primarily on the potential cost savings associated with reduced enforcement efforts if speed limits are maintained at their current levels, and disregard feedback suggesting potential safety benefits from adjustments. Option C. Prioritize the feedback from the most vocal and organized group of rural landowners who have expressed strong opposition to any reduction in speed limits, as their concerns represent a significant segment of the affected population. Option D. Implement the proposed changes based on the feedback from a majority of the public consultation respondents, without further detailed analysis of the specific safety implications for different vehicle types or road conditions. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment that analyzes the potential effects of proposed changes on all identified road user groups, traffic flow, and accident statistics, while also considering the feasibility of enforcement and the overall public safety goals outlined in the Motor Vehicle Act of British Columbia. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in public consultation processes where diverse stakeholder interests can lead to conflicting feedback regarding proposed changes to traffic safety regulations in British Columbia. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate concerns of specific user groups with the broader public interest in road safety, ensuring that decisions are informed, equitable, and legally compliant with the Motor Vehicle Act of British Columbia and its associated regulations. Careful judgment is required to avoid prioritizing vocal minorities over the general welfare or implementing measures that could inadvertently create new safety risks. The best approach involves a comprehensive impact assessment that systematically evaluates the potential consequences of proposed changes on all identified stakeholder groups and the overall road safety environment. This includes gathering quantitative data where possible, e.g., accident statistics, traffic flow, and qualitative feedback, analyzing these inputs to understand the magnitude and nature of potential impacts, and then developing mitigation strategies or alternative solutions. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of evidence-based policymaking and the ethical obligation to ensure that regulatory changes demonstrably improve public safety and are implemented fairly, as implicitly required by the Motor Vehicle Act's mandate to promote safe driving and road use. It allows for a balanced consideration of all feedback and evidence before a final decision is made. An approach that solely prioritizes the feedback from the most vocal or organized stakeholder group is incorrect because it risks overlooking the needs and safety of other road users and the general public. This could lead to regulations that are not universally beneficial or could even create unintended negative consequences for less represented groups, failing the broader public safety objective. An approach that dismisses feedback from groups expressing concerns about potential negative impacts without thorough investigation is also incorrect. This failure to engage with and analyze all relevant concerns violates the principle of due diligence and can lead to poorly designed regulations that do not adequately address real-world safety issues or stakeholder impacts. Furthermore, an approach that focuses only on the perceived ease of implementation or cost-effectiveness, without adequately considering the safety implications for all road users, is professionally unacceptable. The primary objective of traffic safety regulations is to prevent accidents and protect lives, and any decision that compromises this core purpose, even for efficiency reasons, is a regulatory and ethical failure. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the problem and objectives. This is followed by identifying all relevant stakeholders and systematically gathering their input and relevant data. The next step is to conduct a thorough impact assessment, analyzing the potential positive and negative consequences of proposed changes across all dimensions: safety, equity, feasibility. Finally, decisions should be made based on the comprehensive analysis, with clear justification and transparency, ensuring alignment with the Motor Vehicle Act's overarching goal of public safety in British Columbia. Question 15. The performance metrics show a significant increase in instances of drivers failing to yield the right-of-way at uncontrolled intersections across various regions in British Columbia. Considering the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act's emphasis on road safety and driver responsibility, which of the following approaches would be the most effective and compliant response to address this trend? Option A. Launch a broad public awareness campaign across all media channels about the dangers of not yielding, without any accompanying enforcement or specific educational follow-up. Option B. Implement a province-wide general increase in traffic enforcement patrols, with officers instructed to issue tickets for any observed failure to yield, regardless of specific location data. Option C. Immediately initiate a review process to suspend the driver's licenses of all individuals identified in the performance metrics as having failed to yield, pending further investigation. Option D. Analyze the data to identify specific intersections and times with the highest incidence of noncompliance, and then develop targeted educational campaigns and focused enforcement operations in those identified high-risk areas. The correct answer is D. Analyze the data to identify specific intersections and times with the highest incidence of noncompliance, and then develop targeted educational campaigns and focused enforcement operations in those identified high-risk areas. Explanation: the performance metrics show a concerning trend in driver behavior related to yielding at uncontrolled intersections, a critical safety concern in British Columbia. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for immediate intervention to prevent accidents with the practical realities of driver education and enforcement resources. A careful judgment is required to select the most effective and compliant approach. The best professional practice involves a multifaceted approach that prioritizes education and targeted enforcement based on data. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act, which emphasizes promoting safe driving habits and reducing collisions. Specifically, the Act encourages educational initiatives and the use of enforcement to address identified risks. By analyzing the specific locations and times of these incidents, authorities can develop targeted educational campaigns and deploy enforcement resources where they are most needed, maximizing impact and efficiency. This data-driven strategy also fosters a proactive rather than reactive safety culture. An incorrect approach would be to implement a blanket, province-wide increase in general traffic enforcement without specific data to justify the increased presence. This fails to address the root cause of the observed behavior and can lead to inefficient allocation of resources. It also risks alienating drivers who are not exhibiting the problematic behavior, potentially leading to resentment and reduced cooperation with law enforcement. Another incorrect approach would be to solely rely on public awareness campaigns without any accompanying enforcement or educational follow-up. While awareness is important, it is often insufficient to change ingrained driving habits, especially when safety is compromised. Without reinforcement through education or enforcement, the impact of such campaigns is likely to be minimal and temporary. A further incorrect approach would be to immediately suspend the driver's licenses of all drivers observed failing to yield, without considering the context or severity of each infraction. This punitive measure, without due process or consideration for educational opportunities, is disproportionate and does not align with the rehabilitative and educational goals often embedded in traffic safety legislation. It also places an undue burden on the judicial and administrative systems. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with data analysis to identify specific safety issues. This should be followed by an assessment of potential interventions, considering their effectiveness, cost, and alignment with regulatory objectives. Prioritizing educational and targeted enforcement strategies, informed by data, is generally the most effective and ethically sound approach to improving road safety in British Columbia. Question 16. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at a specific intersection due to increased traffic volume during peak hours, coupled with a moderate severity of potential injury. Considering the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act, which of the following actions best addresses this identified risk? Option A. Maintain current speed, assuming other drivers will also exercise caution. Option B. Brake sharply and abruptly to signal a heightened awareness of potential danger. Option C. Reduce speed and increase observation distance to allow for earlier hazard detection and reaction time. Option D. Rely on the intersection's design to inherently mitigate the risk, requiring no immediate driver action. The correct answer is C. Reduce speed and increase observation distance to allow for earlier hazard detection and reaction time. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at a specific intersection due to increased traffic volume during peak hours, coupled with a moderate severity of potential injury. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a proactive approach to road safety, balancing resource allocation with the need to prevent accidents. The driver must assess the situation not just based on immediate personal risk, but also on the broader impact on public safety and adherence to British Columbia's Motor Vehicle Act. The best approach involves immediately reducing speed and increasing observation distance. This is correct because it directly addresses the identified risks by mitigating the likelihood of a collision. Reducing speed provides more time to react to unexpected events, and increasing observation distance allows for earlier detection of hazards, such as sudden braking by vehicles ahead or pedestrians entering the roadway. This aligns with the fundamental principles of defensive driving and the legal duty of care expected of all drivers in British Columbia, as outlined in the Motor Vehicle Act, which mandates drivers to operate their vehicles with reasonable care and attention to avoid danger to themselves and others. An incorrect approach would be to maintain current speed and rely solely on the expectation that other drivers will also be cautious. This fails to acknowledge the increased risk indicated by the risk matrix and neglects the driver's responsibility to actively manage their own contribution to safety, disregards the potential for cascading failures in traffic flow, and increases the probability of being unable to react effectively to unforeseen circumstances, potentially leading to a collision. Another incorrect approach would be to brake sharply and abruptly without clear necessity. While intended to increase safety, such an action can itself create a hazard, potentially causing a rear-end collision if the following driver is not maintaining a safe distance or is inattentive. This demonstrates a lack of situational awareness and an impulsive reaction rather than a considered response to the identified risks. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume that the intersection's design inherently mitigates the risk, and therefore no immediate action is required. This demonstrates a failure to conduct an ongoing impact assessment and a dangerous reliance on static conditions. Road safety is dynamic, and drivers must continuously evaluate their surroundings and adjust their driving behavior accordingly, irrespective of perceived infrastructure safety features. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that involves continuous risk assessment. This includes recognizing potential hazards, evaluating their likelihood and severity, and implementing appropriate countermeasures. The process should prioritize actions that proactively reduce risk and align with legal and ethical obligations to ensure the safety of all road users. Question 17. Market research demonstrates that new drivers in British Columbia often find it difficult to navigate uncontrolled intersections with multiple vehicles approaching. During a road test, you approach an uncontrolled intersection where a vehicle on your left and a vehicle on your right arrive at approximately the same time as you. The vehicle on your left is signaling to turn left. What is the safest and most legally compliant action to take? Option A. Assume the vehicle on your left will yield to you because you are proceeding straight. Option B. Yield to the vehicle on your right as it has the right-of-way. Option C. Proceed through the intersection first, as the vehicle on your left is turning left and may be expecting you to go. Option D. Stop and wait for all other vehicles to pass before proceeding. The correct answer is B. Yield to the vehicle on your right, as it has the right-of-way. Explanation. Market research demonstrates that many new drivers in British Columbia struggle with understanding the nuances of right-of-way in complex intersection scenarios, particularly when faced with unexpected situations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to assess not just rote memorization of rules, but the applicant's ability to apply those rules safely and defensively in a dynamic environment. The examiner must also ensure the applicant understands the underlying principles of road safety, not just the letter of the law. The correct approach involves the applicant demonstrating a clear understanding of the fundamental principle of right-of-way at an uncontrolled intersection, prioritizing the vehicle already in the intersection or the vehicle to the right when both arrive simultaneously. This is correct because Section 26 of the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act clearly outlines the rules for uncontrolled intersections, emphasizing the need for drivers to yield to vehicles already in the intersection or to the vehicle on their right. This approach reflects a safe and legally compliant driving behavior, prioritizing accident prevention. An incorrect approach would be to assume the vehicle to the left must yield simply because it is to the left. This fails to acknowledge the primary rule of yielding to the vehicle on the right when two vehicles arrive at an uncontrolled intersection at approximately the same time, as stipulated by the Motor Vehicle Act. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed without hesitation, assuming the other driver will yield. This demonstrates a lack of defensive driving and a disregard for the right-of-way rules, creating a dangerous situation and violating the principles of safe driving. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to stop completely and wait for all other vehicles to pass, even if they have arrived after the applicant. While cautious, this demonstrates an inability to apply the right-of-way rules correctly and can impede traffic flow unnecessarily, potentially causing confusion or frustration for other road users. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, legal compliance, and defensive driving principles. This involves understanding the core rules, anticipating potential hazards, and making decisions that minimize risk to oneself and others. In driving scenarios, this means applying the rules of the road with a focus on preventing collisions and ensuring smooth traffic flow. Question 18. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood of an applicant being nervous during their British Columbia Class 5 road test, potentially leading to minor errors. Considering the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act's emphasis on safe operation of a vehicle, which of the following approaches best ensures public safety while fairly assessing the applicant's driving competency? Option A. Permit the applicant to perform a maneuver that is borderline unsafe, but not immediately dangerous, with the intention of providing immediate corrective feedback during the test itself, rather than failing them. Option B. Conduct the road test meticulously, observing all aspects of driving performance against the established criteria in the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act, and document any errors, regardless of their perceived severity, to make an objective pass/fail decision. Option C. Expedite the road test by focusing only on critical maneuvers, assuming that nervousness will naturally subside, and the applicant will demonstrate their true abilities in less stressful situations. Option D. Allow for a few minor, non-hazardous errors due to nervousness, assuming the applicant will learn from the experience and be a safe driver overall, to ensure a positive testing experience. Correct answer is B. Conduct the road test meticulously, observing all aspects of driving performance against the established criteria in the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act, and document any errors, regardless of their perceived severity, to make an objective pass/fail decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and safety requirements of the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act. The applicant's eagerness and the examiner's desire to be efficient must not compromise the integrity of the licensing process. A thorough assessment of the applicant's ability to operate a vehicle safely and in compliance with all traffic laws is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a systematic and objective evaluation of the applicant's driving skills against the standards set out in the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act and associated regulations. This includes observing the applicant's adherence to traffic signals, signs, speed limits, lane changes, and general road awareness. The examiner must ensure that the applicant demonstrates a complete understanding and application of safe driving practices, including defensive driving techniques and the ability to anticipate potential hazards. This approach is correct because it directly fulfills the examiner's mandate to ensure that only competent and safe drivers are licensed, thereby upholding public safety on British Columbia's roads as mandated by law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to overlook minor infractions or to assume competence based on the applicant's confidence or previous experience. This is ethically and regulatorily unsound because the Motor Vehicle Act does not provide for exceptions based on perceived applicant confidence. Every applicant must meet the same objective standards to ensure road safety for all British Columbians. Another incorrect approach would be to rush the test to accommodate the applicant's schedule or to avoid potential conflict. This is unacceptable as it compromises the thoroughness of the assessment. The duration and scope of the test are designed to adequately evaluate all necessary driving competencies. Expediting the process without full evaluation is a dereliction of duty and a violation of the principles of safe driver licensing. A further incorrect approach would be to allow the applicant to perform maneuvers that are clearly unsafe or illegal, with the intention of correcting them later or assuming they will learn. This is highly dangerous and directly contravenes the purpose of the driver's test, which is to ascertain current safe driving ability. Allowing unsafe actions, even with the intent of future correction, puts the applicant and the public at immediate risk and is a severe breach of regulatory responsibility. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance above all else. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing the specific requirements of the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act and the testing procedures. 2. Maintaining objectivity and impartiality throughout the assessment, unaffected by external pressures or applicant demeanor. 3. Conducting a comprehensive evaluation of all required driving skills and knowledge. 4. Making a clear and justifiable decision based solely on the observed performance against established criteria. 5. Documenting the assessment accurately and thoroughly. Question 19. The risk matrix shows a potential for increased road incidents if drivers are not adequately experienced. A young applicant in British Columbia presents their documentation for a Class 5 driver's license, stating they have completed all required driving hours, but their logbook appears incomplete and lacks sufficient detail to verify the duration and types of driving conditions experienced. The applicant is eager to obtain their license immediately. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing agent? Option A. Advise the applicant to simply estimate the remaining hours and fill in the logbook to meet the minimum requirements. Option B. Issue the Class 5 driver's license to the applicant, assuming they have met the requirements, to avoid delaying their progress. Option C. Clearly explain to the applicant that their logbook does not meet the detailed verification requirements for the Class 5 license under British Columbia's graduated licensing program, and advise them on how to properly complete and submit a compliant logbook, or to seek further supervised driving experience. Option D. Deny the license without further explanation, stating only that the application is incomplete. The correct answer is C. Clearly explain to the applicant that their logbook does not meet the detailed verification requirements for the Class 5 license under British Columbia's graduated licensing program, and advise them on how to properly complete and submit a compliant logbook, or to seek further supervised driving experience. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for a driver's license with the legal and safety requirements mandated by British Columbia's Motor Vehicle Act and its associated regulations. The applicant's eagerness and potential lack of full understanding of the rules create a situation where a licensing agent must uphold the integrity of the licensing process without being overly punitive or dismissive. The agent must exercise sound judgment to ensure public safety on BC roads. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly and patiently explaining the specific reasons why the applicant is not yet eligible for a Class 5 license, referencing the relevant sections of the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act regarding graduated licensing and required experience. This approach educates the applicant on the legal requirements, outlines the necessary steps for them to take, and maintains the integrity of the licensing system. It demonstrates professionalism by providing constructive feedback and a clear path forward, adhering to the spirit and letter of BC's licensing laws designed to ensure driver competency and road safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately deny the license without providing any explanation. This fails to educate the applicant, potentially leading to frustration and a lack of understanding of the legal requirements, which is unprofessional and unhelpful. It does not align with the service-oriented aspect of a licensing office, which should aim to guide applicants through the process. Another incorrect approach is to grant the license despite the applicant not meeting the minimum experience requirements. This is a serious regulatory failure. It directly violates the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act's provisions on graduated licensing, which are in place to ensure new drivers gain sufficient practical experience under varying conditions before operating a vehicle independently. This action compromises public safety by putting an inadequately prepared driver on the road and undermines the entire licensing framework. A third incorrect approach is to suggest the applicant falsify their logbook to meet the requirements. This is not only unethical but also illegal. It constitutes aiding and abetting fraud and directly contravenes the principles of honesty and integrity expected of both applicants and licensing officials. Such an action would have severe consequences for the licensing agent and the applicant, and it poses a significant risk to public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals in licensing roles must always prioritize adherence to the governing legislation, in this case, the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act. When faced with an applicant who does not meet the criteria, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the specific legal requirement not met. 2. Clearly communicating this requirement and the reason for ineligibility to the applicant. 3. Providing information on how to meet the requirement. 4. Maintaining professional demeanor and upholding the integrity of the licensing process. This ensures both legal compliance and a positive, albeit informative, interaction with the public. Question 20. The risk matrix shows a moderate probability of a minor collision occurring at the intersection of Main Street and Broadway in Vancouver, British Columbia during rush hour. You are involved in a collision at this intersection. Upon inspection, you estimate that the damage to your vehicle is approximately $1,500, and the damage to the other vehicle appears to be around $1,800. There are no injuries. Based on the Motor Vehicle Act of British Columbia, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Offer to pay for the other driver's repairs directly without exchanging insurance information to avoid an increase in insurance premiums. Option B. Exchange insurance information with the other driver and document the incident, as the estimated damage to each vehicle is below the $2,000 reporting threshold. Option C. Leave the scene after a brief visual inspection, assuming the damage is minor and not worth reporting. Option D. Immediately contact the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, to report the collision, as it occurred in a high-risk intersection. The correct answer is B. Exchange insurance information with the other driver and document the incident, as the estimated damage to each vehicle is below the $2,000 reporting threshold. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate safety concerns with the financial implications of a potential accident. The driver must make a rapid assessment of risk and cost, adhering to the legal requirements for reporting accidents in British Columbia. Careful judgment is required to avoid both unnecessary escalation and potential legal repercussions for failing to report. The best approach involves accurately assessing the damage, determining if it meets the threshold for mandatory reporting under British Columbia's Motor Vehicle Act, and then proceeding with the appropriate actions. This aligns with the legal obligation to report accidents involving significant damage or injury. Specifically, if the estimated damage to any vehicle or property exceeds $2,000, or if there is any injury or death, the driver is legally required to report the accident to the police or the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia, IC. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and responsible accident management. An incorrect approach would be to assume the damage is minor without a reasonable basis for that assumption, and then leaving the scene without attempting to ascertain the extent of the damage or exchanging information. This fails to meet the legal requirement to report accidents that meet the damage threshold, potentially leading to penalties. Another incorrect approach is to immediately call the police for minor damage that clearly falls below the reporting threshold. While seemingly cautious, this can be an inefficient use of police resources and may not be the most appropriate first step if the damage is demonstrably minor and no injuries are present. Furthermore, attempting to resolve the matter with the other driver without any documentation or understanding of the reporting requirements could lead to future disputes or issues with insurance claims if the damage is more substantial than initially perceived. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the immediate situation, including any injuries. Next, they must consult the relevant regulations, in this case, the British Columbia Motor Vehicle Act regarding accident reporting thresholds. If the situation meets the reporting criteria, the appropriate authorities must be contacted. If not, and if there is agreement between parties, a written record of the incident and exchange of insurance information should be made. This systematic approach ensures both safety and legal compliance.